As lawyers, we operate within an economy, and for many of us who advise international clients, who advise corporates, businesses, investors, who have advised different classes of clients, we would like to understand the implications that the current situation across the globe and in Africa, and especially in Nigeria, has on investment, has on trade, has on the operations of our clients. And then as we begin to move forward, as the world perhaps overcomes the pandemic, as the world begins to move away from the present normal back to what used to be, or perhaps into a new reality where things take on a shape of normalcy, as businesses begin to somewhat operate the way they should, what can we expect? Across Africa, we've seen different policies being announced by the national governments. We've also seen examples here in Nigeria of different states announcing different initiatives to help small and medium enterprises cope with the impact of the pandemic on their businesses. We've seen policies aimed at helping to stimulate the economy. Of recent, the federal government of Nigeria released the National Economic Sustainability Plan, which contains a number of policy strategies and ideas on what is going to be done across various sectors, from agriculture to oil and gas, and especially to help small and medium enterprises to weather the storm and move forward. So some of these things are the issues we look forward to discussing here. And for this purpose, we've invited specialists across different fields who have advised and participated in different initiatives around economy, around policy, and around investment. We've also ensured that we have the participation of people who can speak to the issues from a broad perspective, either looking at things in terms of the continent, or looking at things in terms of Nigeria as a country, or looking at things in terms of what is happening at the subnational level, that is at the state level. We also have people who are going to be able to speak to what the private sector expects or is doing in order to move past this stage. So without further ado, I would like to welcome all our panelists and all our participants who are joining us directly here on Zoom, and those who will be joining us or who are joining us via the live stream on our Facebook page. You're welcome to this session, and we hope that you'll benefit from the insights to be shared by all our panelists. The session is going to be moderated by Winifred Odonye, who is an experienced international development professional currently working with the World Bank Group. She works with governments on economic advisory and policy reforms to improve the competitiveness of the private sector. Winifred holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Carleton University in Canada and a master's in energy management from the University of Dundee in the United Kingdom. Winifred is very passionate about courses that improve sustainable development, especially amongst the youth and women, and she has been invited to and currently sits on boards of social impact organizations that promote such courses. Before I hand over to Winifred, I'll just make a quick run through of the profiles of our panelists. Joining us this afternoon, we have Mr. Emeka Offor, who is the Director of Strategic Communications at the Nigerian Investment Commissions Commission, NIPC. He's a man who is driven by a passion to solve business challenges on a sustainable basis. He's a first-class scholar, trained in the United Kingdom. He has an MSc in corporate governance and also an MBA from Lagos, Nigeria. He has developed competence and expertise spanning over 27 years in banking, corporate governance, business consulting, research, negotiation, investment promotion, public policy development, and strategic communications. Prior to his current position as Director of Strategic Communications at NIPC, he has worked with many leading banks in Nigeria at strategic levels, where his contributions resulted in quantum leaps for the banks. He has also worked in different capacities in the public sector, including in the rail sector, Director of Human Resources Development, Director of National Competitiveness and Policy Advocacy, and as a Director of Investment Facilitation and Incentives Administration. This afternoon, also joining us is Ms. Oluwatosin, who is the Managing Partner at Verboheit Consulting, which is a professional services firm that provides business and financial advisory and strategic consulting services to small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as early-stage ventures. Tosin has 12 plus years experience spanning investment research, investment management, and financial services advisory. As managing partner at Verboheit, she's worked with clients in agro-processing, manufacturing, ride-hailing technology, oil and gas services, renewable energy, and interior solutions. Prior to her current position, she worked at Chapel Denham as an investment manager for the AB Fund, which was a target of $30 million with Chapel's subsidiary SME.ng that was established to focus on women-owned businesses, and also as vice president in the CEO's office. Also joining us this afternoon is someone who is going to be bringing in a lot of insights from the national and continental level. Adetola Onayemi, who serves as the Assistant Chief Negotiator for Nigeria and head of the Trade Remedies and Investigating Authority at the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations. Adetola is also the winner of the Future Awards Africa 2019 Prize in Public Service, and in furtherance of the mandate of the Federal Executive Council and the Nigerian Economic Management Team, Adetola worked with a global law firm to develop a trade remedies infrastructure for protecting the Nigerian economy from injurious and unfair trading practices from foreign countries and companies. Presently, he's working on the implementation of the Nigerian trade remedies infrastructure. Another panelist we are very glad and happy to have in our midst this afternoon is Ibrahim Abdullahi, who is currently the special advisor to the governor of Nasarawa State, a Nigerian subnational. He's a trade, investment, and finance lawyer with multifaceted advisory experience. He spearheads the Nasarawa Ease of Doing Business reform efforts and also serves as the head of the governor's delivery unit, as well as the secretary of the Nasarawa Investment and Economic Advisory Council. Ibrahim holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from University of Reading in the United Kingdom. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see from the run-through, we have a very rich panel, and they will be doing justice to the discussion at hand. So right now, I will hand over and yield the floor to Winifred, who will be moderating the panel session. Winifred.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Please confirm that you can.
Mm-hmm. Our participants are muted, so don't worry. Go ahead.
Okay, that's good. All right, you're all welcome to the Lawyard Dialogue Series. This is actually the first of many to come, and it's important to always talk about what we're going through and how we can overcome our challenges. And so that's why we're here today. Unfortunately, we have found ourselves in the midst of COVID-19, and there's really nothing anybody can do about it. But how can we overcome is really the question. So as people, as government, as individuals, as SMEs, as companies, as policymakers, analysts, or just as passive Nigerians, how can we truly improve our nation? How can we learn from other African countries, beyond Africa actually, But today we're going to focus on other African countries. And then what policies do we have in place? And what can we improve upon? And what can we discard of? Those are the kind of discussions we're going to be having today. And hopefully we're able to learn from each other as well as impact on each other. Unfortunately, Nigeria is vulnerable because of its demand, because of the fall in oil prices, and because we are heavily dependent on the oil for revenue and for Forex. So in terms of challenges that we're envisioning, of course, the recession is also there, but unemployment, social effects, just the one-on-one interactions with individuals day by day. I'm sure you know that Nigerians were very boisterous, but these things have been curtailed. We've been cut short. Hopefully, we're able to see a change, and that's why we're all here today. So I would call upon the panelists one by one. They will make individual presentations. Eventually, we will have a Q&A session and a panelist discussion or moderation amongst each other. And then we'll open the floor to you attendees as well to spring up your questions. So please, as they're speaking, just if you need to chat online, just type in your questions so that we can pull them as we go. So let's make it as interactive as possible. And then also just wait upon towards the end where we'll open the floor as well. So I'll call upon the first speaker, Mr. Emeka Offor, who will be speaking upon the overview and projection of new policy measures to attract and retain investments amidst the pandemic. Mr. Offor, please come online. Thank you. Emeka Offor, can you hear us?
Mr. Offor, you're presently muted.
Okay. I think I can be seen now.
Yes. Go ahead. Mr. Offor, it seems you're muted once again. We can't seem to hear you, Mr. Offor.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's an echo. I'd like to advise, I think you are online with two devices. You might need to turn off one because there's an echo feedback for us. Sorry, everyone.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're online now.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So let me just restart my presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. And many thanks to the organizers, the Lawyard. As we all know, the COVID-19 is here with us. The pandemic is here with us. But we must find a way. We must find a way out of the solution. We need to understand the situation, create a new normal in life and in the global economy, as well as in the domestic economy. We have to move on. I've been asked to speak on the overview and projection of new policy measures to attract and retain investment amidst the pandemic. I guess it's important for us to understand that it happened very fast. What we are witnessing now, if you look at the next slide, you will understand that as early as February 2020, the World Health Organization was still trying to understand the pandemic. And in that early February, they gave it a name, COVID-19. As at early March 2020, it was still, well, it has happened in about 100 countries. But even at then, World Health Organization said to the effect that it's a serious situation, but it should not discourage us. The implication is that we've not started panicking as at March. So even 2 or 3 days later, the World Health Organization changed its view of what's happening in the health space. And then they declared that we have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic. That's instructional, for us to know that it's no longer a child's case. It's no longer a minor issue. It is now real. If you look at as early as April, a snapshot on the next slide that shows the dashboard of the Center for Science and Engineering of the Johns Hopkins University. It clearly shows that we have a crisis on our hands. That snapshot was taken on June 11th. But by now, the situation, the status report has even worsened. It has worsened. So the point you are trying to make is that this thing has now moved from a health crisis to an economic crisis. The next slide will show us, for example, the projections by, the next slide, the projections by the IMF. It will show us. If you look at that slide, you will see that IMF had made a projection saying that the pandemic will have global impact. There will be a recession in most countries of the world. From what we have, it appears that the only economy that will escape it slightly will be emerging and developing Asia. It is important for us to also look at what is happening to Nigeria and sub-Saharan Africa, where we see a recession of about 1.6%. And before that, the Latin America shows also what will happen. But technically speaking, it will affect almost every part of the world. The slide we are looking at now just gives a breakdown of what I have just spoken. Nigeria may be hit by something close to a recession of -3.4%, a recession of 3.4%. The implication is that we have to do something about it. The pandemic will severely impact growth across all regions. Talking about Nigeria, and then talking about the global flow of FTI, we looked at the report by UNCTAD, that is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. They have, and then we looked at a 10-year figure, maybe from 2016 rather to 2020, 2021 projection. And we see that the FDI flows at the global level had actually been dropping from 2016, when it recorded 1.9 trillion, to 2017, when 1.4 trillion was recorded as global FDI flow. 2018 recorded 1.4 trillion. 2019 projected as 1.3 trillion because the figures are still being collated. But in 2020 to 2021, even UNCTAD has projected that there will be a 30 to 40% decline on the previous figures of 2019. So global FDI is expected to drop by 30 to 40% in 2020 to 2021. It has never happened in the past 20 years. It's the lowest level you can think of. And so it points to the fact that we are in difficult situation. And there is need for both the government and the private sector to study and understand clearly what is happening and come up with policies that will help us survive and stable in this period of the pandemic. Well, the next slide also shows us just a snapshot of what I've just been saying. It is not easy for Africa, you know. Even before the pandemic, it was difficult. If you look at that slide, it shows us that Asia, for instance, in the last 10 years, got about 29% of the global FDI flows across all sectors. 29% of the 14.97 trillion that happened in the FDI space, Asia got 29%. Europe got 28%. North America got 20%. Africa got 3%. So Africa has not happened, even though we host 17% of the world's population. What does that tell us? We have to wake up. We have to come up with strategic policies to ensure and interventions and initiatives to ensure that we get a greater portion of the FDI flows if we have to achieve development, especially in the COVID and the post-COVID-19 era. The next slide will tell you how FDI has happened in the past 20 years in Nigeria. The important message from this slide that I want to convey to all is that material FDI flows can only be driven by government policies. And we make that assertion by looking at World Bank's database of what happened in Nigeria over the past 20 years, from 1998 to 2018. If you start looking from your left, you see that the first spike recorded around 2001 and 2002 happened as the growth in FDI inflow into Nigeria from 1.28 billion to 2.04 billion happened majorly because of the sector reforms that happened in the telecom space when GSM licenses were auctioned. So because of that, we saw a significant inflow of almost 100% in FDI flows in Nigeria at that level. The next one happened when we did the banking sector reforms that led to consolidation. It jumped from 2.18 to 4.98 billion in terms of FDI flows into Nigeria. The next one was maybe around 2011 to 2012, when it jumped from the figure I mentioned to a high level of 8.9 billion. That happened mainly because of the sale of assets to indigenous companies. So that brought in some material inflow. So technically, since then, we have been having a slide. We have been having a slide. So at the moment, we are close to about 2 billion in terms of FDI flows projected, because the figures are not really in. But the point is that remember that UNCTAD has said there will be a drop of 30 to 40%. And if you deduct 30 to 40% from our existing 2 billion, the impact will begin to dawn on us more clearly. So material policy changes will be required to reverse decline expected in 2020 and 2021. So that's why this initiative or exchange or dialogue is also very important for us to bring to the knowledge of everybody that a lot of things needs to happen. Because now we are getting 2 billion when things were okay. What do you think will happen when things begin to shift? So what are the policy implications of all this? Let's start from the global level. The next slide shows that our estimation, our understanding, our research, our thinking concerning what will happen at the global policy level before we delve into the Nigerian situation is that, first of all, we expect the development of regional production hubs. Globalization seems to me to be outdated. And I say this with every sense of humility, that the globalization seems to be outdated. Unlike before when we talked about globalization, I think the time has come with what we have seen on the global over-reliance on one production base is no longer attractive. A lot of countries depend on some countries to get inflows for their raw materials, import goods and services that they need. We think that going forward, the development of regional production hubs will become more crucial for every economy that wants to succeed and excel. The next thing we expect to happen in terms of policy at the global level is that the drive for increasing domestic production capacity will be in the front burner, especially for items considered basic or essential to national needs. You have to produce what you think is essential. Some of us will remember what happened at the onset of the pandemic. There was lockdown, there was travel restrictions, and then people could not get in goods that they need, even essential medical stuff. That is when we started seeing people manufacturing face masks, nose masks, and the rest of them. The drive to increase domestic production, produce what you need, will have to be on the front burner. The next one that we think is also crucial is that maybe investors will begin to look at changing their considerations for doing business, for investing. Instead of just relying on financial returns, which is a primary consideration, there may be need for them to also look at impact investment, whereby you combine financial returns plus the impact you have on the environment, the impact you have on the social economy, the impact, the corporate social responsibility. And that also means that we expect that most companies, most investors will begin to look at how, in addition to doing their business, how they can attain the sustainable development goals. If you look back at the onset of the pandemic, most large corporates started doling out palliatives in one way or the other. Some of them started making contributions, huge contributions, to support sectors that are not even part of their ecosystem. Maybe making donations for isolation centers and so on and so forth. So we expect that in going forward, investors and large corporates and businesses will look at how do we infuse these sustainable development goals into our processes. Then finally, even though we see huge impact as a result of the pandemic, we believe that some sectors will be enhanced by the pandemic. We're already seeing some of them. The attractiveness of some sectors are better than others. Our little analysis seems to suggest that some sectors have become more attractive, while some will receive a hit or have received a hit. For instance, the aviation sector, they have not been operating. They've been like comatose for the past few months. But Sectors like renewable energy, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, and others, especially the sectors that are driven by disruptive digital technologies, e-commerce, fintech, edutech, healthtech. You see, one of the reasons why they receive or witness an upsurge in attractiveness is because using technology, we can bypass some of the frustrations that you see in the system. So in terms of failure of infrastructure and so on and so forth. But these few sectors and others will have their attractiveness enhanced. We think that there is need for a sector scan to really understand which sectors will do better, what should be done to mitigate those that are having issues. But let's now look at the policy options for Nigeria. What should Nigeria do in terms of policy to combat the impact of the pandemic? The first thing we do, looking at the global level and the role of government, is sustained improvement of the business environment. If the business environment is not enhanced, it will be more difficult to do business. So we should look at removing of all the administrative or regulatory bottlenecks that currently impede business in Nigeria. If those bottlenecks we were able to manage and survive with them during normal times, now that the pandemic is here, we all, both the private sector and the public sector, have to seek a means of improving the business environment. That is a major policy consideration. Incidentally, we have PEBEC, the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, faced with improving the business environment. They have been trying, but they need to do more. And it's not just their work, because they're just like coordinating what everybody does. So removal, we will have to remove all these administrative and regulatory bottlenecks. It's very crucial. The next thing is, how do we protect existing investors? You know, the impact is felt more on existing investors. We've looked at some surveys that we have done. Even NIPC will soon do a more detailed survey on the impact on the existing investors. We want to know how they were affected or how they are being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. What should we do for them? There will be need to do reforms in the area of financial and tax incentives. What should government provide for them? Should government do a bailout? And so on and so forth. These are issues that need to be clearly spelled out and sorted. The next one is commitment to investment aftercare. Quick delivery of problem-solving aftercare to resolve the challenges that existing investors face, particularly with government agencies. Most regulators, most government agencies may have issues with these investors. This is the time for us to resolve all the issues, even at a sustainable level. In NIPC, we have what we call the one-stop investment center. Beyond the one-stop investment center, the job it does is to provide a mechanism for facilitating investment in Nigeria, especially at the entry level. But beyond the entry level, we have also put in place what we call the OSIC Lab. OSIC Lab is just a mechanism for resolving investors' complaints or issues. What we do there is we bring the investors with the government agencies and everybody that has to do with the issue or the challenge. We sit down in one room and until we resolve it. The idea is to provide a transparent resolution, provide a speedy resolution, as well as provide a whole of government approach to resolving investors' challenges. So it will not be a situation that one agency is working to resolve it, another agency is countering what the other agency is doing. So the whole, at OSIC Lab, we use or try to utilize and achieve a whole of government solution to investors' problem. The next thing we need to do is for the government to partially privatize government interests in critical sectors to unlock capital. In one of the slides that we saw, you remember that the material growth in FDI occurred when government initiated some reforms, like the GSM telecom reforms. Huge inflow of FDI came in. When we did banking sector reforms, huge FDI inflows came in. When we also sold assets, oil sector assets, huge inflows came in. That's an analysis over the past 20 years. So it's important that at this stage, government should also look at what could be done to ensure that this happens. Back to my initial slide, sale of oil assets guided by the NLNG model. That NLNG model was very successful. NIPC tried to conduct a survey, an analysis of the top 100 corporations in Nigeria. And it was clear that companies like NLNG were at the forefront. They came tops. And we are suggesting that in selling any other asset by the federal government, that we should look at that model and adopt it because it was very successful. Concession, I'm still in slide 12. Concession of power transmission and further power sector reforms. Concession of major air and sea ports. Private sector management of public health facilities. Especially now, we need to look at how to improve the health facilities. A dying population will be difficult for it to grow its economy. So health is very important, especially healthcare in a country like Nigeria. Now, how are we going to put all these things together to promote investment? The next slide will show you some of the proactive investment promotion strategies that NIPC has put in place to attract investments in Nigeria. That slide mentioned the OSIC lab. I just discussed the OSIC lab, that it aims to improve all of government delivery of investor support. The next strategy is the FDI strategy, improve investor experience and feedback. The next one is company focus, where we proactively invite targeted companies to Nigeria and handhold them through the decision-making and implementation process. You have to identify those who are interested in doing business in Nigeria. You have to specifically and proactively woo them to come to Nigeria and then help them to go through the process. The DDI, we believe that this is the time to encourage more Nigerians to invest in their own country. And we are seeing a lot of it beginning to happen now, because remember my slide on regional hubs, that there's need to develop regional hubs. Most countries would like to develop in their own country. So this is a time for Nigerians to invest in their own country. And this may be one of the good points from the pandemic. If Nigerians are to develop their own economy, one of the fears we have at the Commission is that we don't want a situation whereby in 10 years or 20 years, all the good investment opportunities in Nigeria have been taken over by foreigners. We want Nigerians to invest in their country, be ambassadors of their own country. We also want foreign direct investment. We want investors to invest in Nigeria. In that way, the pie is fuller. The book of states, we think it's important to work with the states. So we created what we call the book of states to better understand competitive advantage of the states and the best and regional investment prospects. We want the states, because all the investments ultimately will stay in the states. So if the states are better equipped to understand their competitive advantages and the opportunities inherent in the state, and to understand how to attract investment, we will get so much. So this is a time we expect the states to rise up education. And NIPC is willing to give as much support as possible. Recently, we had an engagement with all the states. In April, we had an engagement with all the states' investment promotion agencies. It was a knowledge sharing session whereby we looked at the issues and the challenges they are facing. And we'll continue with those engagements. And we are also learning. The idea is for each state to do like a peer review mechanism where they learn from the successes of others, and then so that everybody will move in at the same time. We have the country-focused strategy, we have the sector-focused strategy. I think another proactive measure that we have taken in NIPC and will continue to take is a BIT review, whereby we try to balance investors' rights with obligations. Some of this may be interesting to lawyers because we understand from our analysis that we did that some of the BITs, bilateral investment treaties that we signed as a country, did not balance investors' rights with obligations. In fact, some of them even have clauses that favor foreigners to the extent that even Nigerian investors cannot access those clauses or benefits. So the BIT review aims to holistically look at all these clauses and then develop new model of negotiating these treaties. Incidentally, UNCTAD has accepted the Nigerian model, and they are now trying to encourage most countries of the world to adopt the Nigerian model. That's the new, I'm talking about the new model that we have put in place, which we call our ideas, it balances all the investments. In fact, it balances investors' rights with obligations. So the next slide just gives you a brief.
Sorry, Mr. Offor, we're running out of the allotted
time. Yes, I think I still have like 6 minutes.
Okay, well, I think it's less than that actually, but if we can round it.
Okay. So basically, let me just stop here since my time is up. But let me just give you an overview of NIPC. That is an agency of the federal government of Nigeria, and our role, basically, or mandate, basically, is to encourage, promote, and coordinate investment in Nigeria. We have a newsletter that you can subscribe to and get more information on NIPC and the work we do. You can also go to our website and look at what is there. You will get a lot of information. nipc.gov.ng. You can subscribe to our mailing list on that website, and then you get as much information as you like. On that note, I would like to end by saying that while the pandemic comes with challenges, both at the health sector and at the economic level, we need to move forward. We should not just be sitting down, we should not just be crying wolf or whatever. But the time has come for us to strategically look at what we need to do in order to ensure that the new normal we are creating will be such that will be of benefit to all of us. Thank you for listening to me. I hope I did not waste your time too much.
No, you surely didn't. Thank you so, so much. That was very insightful. The work that NIPC is doing, very insightful. And it's highly commendable that UNCTAD is also willing to recommend the platform that you have already created. That's the BIT platform as well. So kudos to you, sir, that the work that NIPC is doing is great. And I can just but imagine what more you could have told us. I would like to request, if it's okay, if you can share the slide. I'm sure people would like to read more and be able to digest further what you spoke about. So is that an okay, sir?
Yes, you can go ahead and share.
Okay, thank you. We will.
Okay, perfect. So please, everyone who's online, Mr. Offor is willing to share his slides. So if you want to participate, if you want to be able to get more information, please just type in your email address and we'll forward it to you as well. Don't forget, if you have questions, also type as well so that we can also pool all your questions together. Thank you so much, sir. That was insightful indeed. So everyone, please, a virtual round of applause to Mr. Offor, Emeka Offor, the Director, Strategic Communications, Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission. So yes, if you can virtually clap, that would be great. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Very well. Okay then, so we'll move on to our next speaker. We have on board Ms. Oluwatosin Ojo, and she is the Managing Partner for Verboheit Consulting. She'll be speaking about the economic and investment strategies that may be considered by national and subnational governments in response to the pandemic. So Ms. Ojo, please come online. Over to you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Go
okay.
ahead.
We can hear you.
All right, thank you. I want to establish that, everyone can hear me. I'm sharing the screen from my end. So thank you again, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be a speaker on this dialogue series. Thanks to the organizers of this series and all the panelists that have been invited. Thanks to Mr. Offor for that insightful presentation, breadth of NIPC's work and policy guidelines, and especially in light of this pandemic. Thank you, and that has really set the tone and the background for some of the things I'll be speaking about, today. So I've been given this topic to share what are some economic and investment looking at the economic of this pandemic. Again, Mr. Offor's presentation did a lot of justice to that, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I will just go through the key highlights of what I have, which is not a lot. Investment strategy or economic strategy for government. One of the things that's very important is the objectives that need to be achieved. And I'll spend some time looking at, okay, what should the economic and investment objectives be for government, particularly in light of COVID-19, and identifying the opportunities that can present, and then what are the strategies that can be adopted. And I'm specifically using one sector here as a case study. Now, in terms of the economic implications of the pandemic, this is just a snapshot of a summary of some of the issues that we've seen, right? And we have the impact of this pandemic, which started first. We thought it was just a healthcare problem, and then quickly it became an economic problem, and now, quite frankly, an economic crisis. Global in Nigeria, no country is immune. So in terms of the impacts we've seen, I'm focusing on three key areas, first from a global context and then from a Nigerian context. We see a lot of decline in trade. The WTO is projecting up to 32% decline in global trade. Domestically also, we have, obviously, because of the internal restriction, the restriction in interstate movement, we've seen, even if we probably don't have the actual data for it yet, but we just know, practically, that we've seen a lot of decline, in internal trade. Manufacturing output is down as well, because a lot of disruption in supply chain in Asia and in many countries. speaking to the importance of the whole concept of globalization and why, you know, countries may need to start producing, you know, what they need to depend on internally, right? In terms of the specific outcomes of that, you know, job losses, falling asset prices, we're in a period where global capital markets are really down, we're in a period where there's increase in inflation, I mean, in prices of goods and services, inflation is on the rise, and that will erode wealth value. In terms of job losses, the ILO, International Labour Organization, projects that we can see close to 305 million equivalents of full-time jobs lost globally because of this pandemic. In the United States, there's over 20 million jobs left. Because of lag effect of our own data collection, we might not have the actual data of what is going on right now, you know, but we all know what these things are. We have about our unemployment rate was about, I think, 23%. But so if you think about how many jobs in the informal sector are either affected now or have been temporarily suspended, up to 2/3 of Nigerians are employed in the informal sector, right? If you think about the number of jobs that have been either affected or the number of work hours have been cut down, then we can begin to imagine the impact of that, even from a Nigerian point of from Nigeria's point of view. For Nigeria specifically, I've taken just two key impacts. That's lower government revenues, FX crunch, and the FX crunch is extremely important, right? Because in two ways, FX crunch is going to lead to decline in output. Apart from the impact of COVID-19 and the reduction in economic activity, our challenge with FX, supply, that FX crunch is going to result into having restricted economic activity, because many companies might not be able to import, may not have sufficient FX to import raw materials or for every service that they need to pay for in FX. So that's important. So, as the entire world is going through, this period, and there's the pandemic related decline in output, we are also going to have this FX related decline in output. And because of that, the second key point then is inflation. It's kind of like a double whammy. You are in a period of declining output, which means you're going into recession, and then you're having inflation. So it's kind of like you're going to what the economists call like a stagflation, which is kind of more difficult to get out from, right? That inflation component also, because the fact in FX supply, the costs of production goes up and then it gets passed on. So we kind of have two things going on for Nigeria. The old pandemic impacts, for which has resulted in reduction of output, because we have to do social distancing, we have to restrict interstate travel, we have to shut down aviation sector to a large extent. That, and the fact that this, FX problem is going to in itself lead to reduction in output. Now, and then of course, we have other macro issues like our debt to service revenue, which was already at a high level before the pandemic, and it just makes it, all of this just makes it more difficult to attract FDI. So that's the background, right? Obviously, it's a recession, so a lot of that has been said. So that's like the snapshot that I would just kind of like the background I like to show about where we are as a country. Now, what should be, given this background of where we are, what should be the objectives for government? In this context, I think my emphasis is on subnational governments, to be honest, because I think that there's a lot in terms of productive capacity that can be unlocked at subnational level, which we're not scratching. And if there's a time when we should do that, if there's an opportunity to do that, this is perhaps, this COVID-19 pandemic is perhaps giving the opportunity for us to do that, right? The national output is sum of parts. Now, a lot of our national output has really been driven by a few states. If we can unlock more city from other states which perhaps before now have not been as have not contributed as much to national output, then it gives us a new, better opportunity to weather this storm. And that's kind of like how I'm looking at it. You know, there's a lot that we say on national level, but Nigeria is composed of 33 states, which individually can be doing a lot. Of course, we know there are objectives that they can pursue this time, because and I've said that the objective influence the what and how the investment opportunities are available and how the strategy. I think this objective should be approached in two ways. There's tactical, which is short term, and the strategic. Now, a lot of responses have been tactical, which is expected. The first thing you want to do is minimize the economic shock and impact of job loss. So we have a lot of interventions from CBN to help MSMEs. We have even a lot of interventions in terms of social, direct cash transfers, social investments to help the very poor and vulnerable, right? We all know that those are great, you know, interventions in the short term, and we've done that. I think there should be this crisis creates. See, in every crisis, there are winners, there are losers. You know, there are always new opportunities that are created in a crisis. And therefore, what needs to be done from a policy point of view to take advantage of those investment opportunities, and what strategies need to be adopted to take advantage of those investment opportunities, so that as there are job losses in some sectors, if we are able to put these things in place, maybe we can start creating jobs in new sectors, right? And I've identified three key areas in terms of looking at economic and investment opportunities that I think that governments, so at subnational level, should in different ways should be thinking about and should be focusing on. The first is digital gig economy. Second is healthcare. Third is affordable homes. This is not exhaustive. These are just three areas that I think because of the pandemic, there's more focus on these areas globally right now. And therefore, Nigeria has the opportunity of mind share. Like there's global mind share on these issues now. And therefore, what can governments quickly do to reposition themselves so that they can attract investments, you know, in these areas? That's why I focused on these three. And why these three? Because of the pandemic, a lot of physical interaction has reduced and a lot of people have lost jobs, right? Because of this reduction in informal sector, there is now work from home reality. Many people have to work from home. So all of a sudden, it becomes really important to have a digital economy, to be able to invest, to be able to get, you know, investors that can invest, to be able to get investment in broadband infrastructure, right? It becomes really important. Lagos is like a really crowded state, you know, and then this kind of creating opportunity for maybe other states for broadband infrastructure investment in a way that if people can work conveniently from home this time, and there's nothing that says that they cannot work outside of the state of commercial centers from home, if there's like sufficient support system in terms of the IT infrastructure required for them to do their work. And to be honest, a number of states have made a move on this, right, in terms of crashing the right-of-way price for broadband investment. So that's kind of like already taking advantage and, you know, thinking in this direction. The second is healthcare. Obviously, you know, the pandemic itself, it's a healthcare problem. The issue here is that this sector is kind of like a really complex sector, and we have a really long way to go, either from a demand side or a supply side in Nigeria. But the key issue here is that what aspect of this healthcare can we start focusing on, as now global attention is on it? Because you don't want a crisis to go to waste. Already WHO is saying that, oh, African countries will be more affected because of our poor healthcare infrastructure. Therefore, there's a lot of, especially developmental investors, impact investors, trying to say, oh, to focus these areas. So what can be done, you know, to position ourselves some of these and the third is mentioned is affordable homes. Affordable homes, again, you know, one of the key preventive measures for those knows how literally ironic that sounds, because most people live in like really condensed accommodation, right? And of course, our housing deficits, I don't know whether the figure has been revised upwards now, but it used to be about 17 million houses, right, that we have. But the key issue here is that we have a lot of lag for a certain kinds of homes, like affordable homes. And therefore, this pandemic creates opportunity in those kind of sector. Now, therefore, what do we need to do? What economic and investment, how should we approach this investment strategy? Now, a strategy really is a plan of action. It's really a plan to achieve a set of objectives, usually over a long term, usually gets towards a long term. Investment strategy, generally speaking, will be how an investor thinks about the goals they want to achieve over a period and what they need to do to achieve those goals. Economic strategy is, broadly speaking, is talking about using economic principles, you know, to identify the value proposition and competitiveness of an institution, and be able to have a plan of action in that regard. And in decision, in this sense, I'm focusing on public institutions, you know, in that regard. So I think what I've put here is kind of like, how should we be thinking about this strategy? I think there's a lot to unpack in each of these sectors, in each of these sectors, that it is very important that every state kind of needs to sit down and do a thorough scan or a mapping of what exactly needs to be done and in which area. Let me explain what I mean by that. And I'm saying healthcare here as a case study. Now, if you look at healthcare in Nigeria, there's so many subsectors and there's so many demand and supply side issues. First is, because if you're going to go and start attracting investors, some of the issues that we have that I think I've seen on the private sector side is that there's just a lot of problems that we have in Nigeria, right? And most of them are difficult problems. But it's not very clear most times what solutions, I mean, it's not very clear what specifically we are targeting. And obviously, commercial, they like to see a clear cut, you know, targeted area so that they can actually see what impact they are going to make, even if it's impact investors, or they can see what return they are going to stand. If you think about the value chain, you have pharmaceuticals, for instance, which can be retail, which can be manufacturing. And by retail, it means how, you know, drugs are sold and get to people. We have primary health care, we have specialist health care, we have tech, health tech, we have diagnostics. These are just some of the areas that I've you know, mentioned. I think if we want to do an exhaustive categorization, there will be more than this, right? If you're thinking about healthcare. If you think about the demand side factors, we think about, so how, because one of the things that is core for investment is that it must be clear how the investment or the intervention will generate returns, economic returns or impact returns. So from an economic return point of view or financial returns point of view, what are the demand side factors? Who is going to pay for healthcare, for instance? Less than 5% of Nigerians have health insurance. That's a problem, right? Is there opportunity for micro insurance? So that might be an area, an aspect of this whole healthcare issue that, you know, a state or, you know, an institution might be focusing on. You know, is that possible? Can we have outcome-based interventions, payments by social impact institutions? These are just some of examples of, you know, thinking along this line. But there are huge demand side factors, and which, if we don't kind of start thinking about and resolving them, it's difficult to talk to investors, whether they are impact investors or commercial investors. On the supply side, we have issues like personnel, doctors, nurses, nursing assistants, pharmacists. We have issues there. We have, you know, a shortfall in many of these healthcare professionals. We have healthcare institutions that are probably poorly funded, right? And that's in terms of the educational capacity. We have hospitals, we have primary healthcare centers, there's equipment, there's materials, equipment, maybe equipment used in the hospitals, or even materials such as face masks, gloves, syringes, infusions, it has come to light how much we lack in terms of capacity for many of these areas. So we can see how dense, just taking healthcare as a sector, how dense it can be, right? And then it's really to then think about what are the opportunity areas as a state. Like I said, my focus really on subnational. As a state, what are the opportunity areas? No, is it in manufacturing of basic materials such as gloves, syringes, surgical masks? Is it in education? Do I have the capacity to beef up my educational system to produce top quality personnel, right? What sort of like the competitive areas? Is it in retail? Is it in retail? If you look at Eastern states, for instance, they're very strong in retail distribution of drugs. Yes, we know that there's been a lot of fakes and stuff there, but there's a strong net already. What can be done to really, organize that and leverage that? And this is sort of like the thinking of how these things can be mapped before you even go and then seek for investment. And obviously, policies. When these things are done, it will be clear which areas need supporting policies from government, which areas need supporting legislations from government, which areas are kind of like vague, where investors are not clear what to do, and where legislation or policies needs to be, where they need to be channeled. And then the last is then the investment strategy, which is to source for the investment. And here I'm really combining both impact and commercial investments, because as it was said in previous presentation, there's a lot of focus globally now on impact investment. And the reality is that from a commercial point of view, we might not be as competitive as certain other emerging markets, like in Southeast Asia, or like in Eastern Europe, from just a purely commercial point of view, right? Because if you think about commercial returns, most investors, financial investors, like institutions, family offices, endowments, sovereign wealth funds, they want returns that at least that's like maybe 20% in dollar return over the period of their investment, let's say a 5 to 10 year horizon. When a country with high inflation, devaluing currency, it's actually difficult to be able to generate that in dollars if we're frank with ourselves. But many of these people, because of the needs and the desires of their investors at the back end, which are like pensioners. So if you think about pension funds globally, like the pensioners at the back end, like the families that own these family offices, one of the key outcomes that they are seeking now is like the impact of these investments. And when we say impact, a lot of people think that a lot of us think that actually, or I can say this investment is going to create jobs. That impact, no. In terms to even be able to identify clear impact, there has to be a way of collecting data and analyzing this data. So there's a lot in terms of impact reporting. So if you're going to be able to attract less rigorous in that sense, in terms of what we need to present to investors or what investors are looking for. And sometimes it's a blend. Sometimes some of these impact investors come and me. But what is important, we have to be able to make this strategy targeted into a specific part of the value chain of course on the right kind of investors. I've mentioned some examples there. For instance, if you think about the African Development Bank, they have identified for healthcare, for affordable housing, they have those kind of investments. If you think about UNCDF, United Nations Capital Development Fund, they have COVID-19 targeted kind of interventions, for subnational governments, for SMEs, through
Hello, Mr. Jill, have we lost you?
Hello.
Okay, now you're back. Just to prompt, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello?
We can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, Ms. Ojo, can you hear?
Hello?
Can you hear me? Hello? Since we're having some network challenges, can you hear me?
Hello? I can't hear anything.
In any event, she was
Can you hear now?
at the end of our presentation.
Okay, then. Okay.
We can perhaps take on Adetola, and then she'll be able to give closing remarks.
Okay, then.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Joe, I don't know if you can hear us, but thank you so much. We've also run out of time. But of course, we'll call you back and then possibly you can give your closing remarks then. I'd like to call upon the next speaker. Yes. I'd like to call upon the next speaker. Actually, everyone, if you can just give a virtual thank you. You can chat thank you as well. That was also very much insightful and she was really going deep. I was looking forward to hear more, but of course, we have to move on to the next speaker, obviously because of network and because of time. So yes, our next speaker is Adetola Onayemi. He's the head trade remedies and assistant chief negotiator at the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations. And he will be speaking about policy measures introduced by African governments in response to the effect of the pandemic on the economy and businesses, and impact on planned implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Yes, I'd like to call upon Mr. Onayemi. Please come online, thank you.
Can you all hear me? Is my audio good?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, you.
Fantastic. I'm happy to be here. Thank you, everyone who's participating. I can see a lot of my friends on the panel. Ibrahim, how are you doing? Thanks to Lawyard for the invitation. I'm particularly excited about the quality of conversations. I followed the session by Mr. Emeka Offor and Joe, one just concluded by Tosin Joe. So because there's a lot of facts and figures flying around, a lot of complex economic theories flying around and all that, what I'll try to do for the next few minutes is to just spend my time detailing what exactly is happening in the entire global economy. So I think I've done a number of articles about it on Medium, on Twitter, but I'll just try and give a context to what's happening in the global economy, what's possible, what needs to be done, and just a path forward. And I spent more of my time trying to talk about the topic, which is mapping a road for prosperity for Africa. So I'll start from the beginning, right? In the last few months, as a last count, as at the 18th of June, countries all over the world have spent about $9 trillion on incentives and palliatives of one form or the other during the pandemic. And it's ranged on a range of things that they've spent that $9 trillion on. In some cases, it's ranged from situations as issue as individual palliatives, so giving people money to pay their rent, giving people money to feed. In some cases, it's been corporate, right? So it's been things that as much as giving people funds to pay salaries. In some cases, it's been loans to businesses. In some cases, it's been things to shore up the stock market, things to restore confidence in the market, and all that. Now, I give a trial scheme of exactly what happened entirely. So, in basic summary, what happened basically was that a virus, the pandemic, came through, I don't know if chemtrail is the right word to say, but the pandemic happened. And when the pandemic happened, what happened was that the global economies were not particularly prepared for it. So we've been having this conversation for the last few years. The pandemic is coming, almost like when you're watching Game of Thrones and they tell you winter is coming. We've all been talking about it for the longest time. The pandemic is coming, but somehow it's almost like how they'll say that the biggest risk is a risk you did not plan for at all. Right, and so this was that one risk we all did not plan for. We planned the pandemic was going to come. We just didn't think it was going to be this kind of pandemic. And what makes this pandemic so interesting is that by the nature of itself, it grounds economic activity. So touch can happen, interactions can happen. You've got to be. It lives on materials. So it changes the nature of economic transactions. And so what happened basically was that economies of the world had to go into lockdowns. Now, if you know how, and let me just give an example. Oil wells, to shut down an oil well, a well-functioning oil well, it actually makes more sense to just keep pumping out oil for free than to shut down the oil well because of the cost of restarting the oil well. That's how much, so think of the entire global economy having to shut down transactions, deals, banks, logistics. For the first time in years, companies like DHL announced that they were going to declare force majeure on some of their deliveries. So it was that complicated. And then what makes that a lot more complicated was that over the last few years, we have kind of, and I heard Mr. Emeka for make pronunciations about how globalization is dead, and I beg to differ, but we'll come to that in a minute. But basically what happened is that because of what's happened over the last few years, where we've driven towards too much more of efficient global supply chains, efficient and low cost of production, what's happened is that we've rewarded the people that can produce at the smallest possible scale. And so what's happened is that a lot of production has moved to Asia. And reason being, there was cheap labor costs, there was good manufacturing costs. And so basically a lot just moved to Asia. And so China became the factory of the world because they could produce things at a better cost than most countries in the world could ever produce it. Industry places like Vietnam also helped, Thailand, Korea. Korea basically is probably one of the most industrialized nations in the world today. And the places like Singapore became logistics hubs. So the world basically changed, right? What happened basically was that the US still has the most sophisticated economy in the world. But the truth is, manufacturing in its crudeness started happening outside of the US. And it became the same for most countries of the world. And let me say this, and because when people say a lot of things about buying and selling, people have to realize also that the nature of global trade is that the biggest importers are also the biggest exporters. The US is number one importer today in the world. But it's number two exporter. China is number one exporter in the world today, but it's number two importer. So the truth is, it's just the nature of global trade because you need components. It's just the nature of global trade. So that's that. Then to make things worse, the oil crisis happened, right? Russia and Saudi Arabia decided it was the perfect time to go on the disagreement on how oil prices had happened over the last few years. And so we basically had a situation where oil prices crashed. And it got so bad at a point where it started getting to negative. And negative basically means that for a person who has an oil contract, it makes more sense for you to just give it out or even pay someone to get the product off your hand than to just keep storing it. So that's what happened. Now, Nigeria and a lot of countries in Africa are very commodity-based. And in fact, to make it worse, single commodity-based. So what that means to a great extent is that there's already the natural cost, even when the global economy was at its best form, there's a risk of of commodity volatility. So basically a case where a commodity spikes, price spikes. So, and the reason is because few commodity traders control most of this industry. They may have several names, but when you distill it, it's just few players. Diamond, chocolate, oil, whatever you choose to call it, cocoa, not chocolate. But the point is, few people control this chain. And what happens is that Africa generally does not really play in the sophisticated manufacturing. A lot of its manufacturing is very basic commodity. So it's things like cocoa, not chocolate. It's crude oil, not petroleum, not petroleum products. It's coffee beans, not the coffee powder. So it's very basic. And what that means already is commodity volatility. When then had to be the situation in which global trade crashes, and generally what happens is that you produce all these commodities, you have all these farmers, and you need the big chains to buy up all that supply. It means then that you're also having a case where you have a lot of things on your hand that you can't even sell because the global market is on standstill. It got so bad that in some countries of the world, I know the US notably, meat actually almost went into scarcity. That's how much of it. And it got to a point where there was something called the massacre, where people were actually just killing their animals rather than keeping them, because it just made more sense to just kill it and throw it away than to keep it. Now, why does all this matter? It matters because a lot of the African countries that we talk are single economic commodity countries. But beyond being single commodity countries is that they also have a resource mobilization problem. Now, what is resource mobilization? It's the fact that a lot of them make their bulk of their income from one single commodity or one single taxation line. In Nigeria's case, that would be petroleum. Nigeria makes, now, and there have been a lot of arguments depending on who you want to believe. Some argue it's as high as 90%, some argue it's as low as 60%, but I don't think anyone argues that that at least 60% of Nigeria's federal revenue comes from oil, right? And to make that more interesting is the fact that a lot of our subnational groups depend for almost 90% of their revenue for running their business, their governments, the salaries, infrastructure, whatever it is they want to do, from the FAC allocations where the federal government distills to several other people. So what you're saying is a case where, as a more continental level, most of Africa depends on a single commodity for its resources and for its federal revenue. And now let me say this: that's not to say the economy is not diversified. No, that's not to say it's not diversified. In fact, in Nigeria's case, oil is actually less than 10% of our entire GDP. So the Nigerian economy is actually very diversified. It's just that for taxation purposes, the government is a lot more efficient in taxing and getting revenue out of oil. And so what that means to a great extent that you have a situation where all of a sudden, and it's the same situation across the world. Even in places like Kenya, they're like probably two products. I know flowers is a big one, coffee is a big deal also. In South Africa, I think South Africa is probably one of the most sophisticated economies in Africa, but even then, it's still 3-4 bulk big items. And so what happens is that a lot of these economies are always struggling between almost getting into a recession or not. I know, for instance, for the last 2-3 years, Nigeria and South Africa have been battling avoiding recessions. South Africa has slipped into it a lot more times than we have, and it's just been that kind of trend. Now, why did I give all this context? I gave it the context because you need to understand the African issue before you can start to chat out what it looks like. Now, the argued way for prosperity globally is simple. It's 1, invest in human capital. 2, invest in infrastructure. 3, negotiate your way into having preferential trade. That's exactly what China did. That's exactly what, and it's a very tested, popular method. But my position is that Africa needs to start having a conversation about whether that can work. Now, what are the ways? 1 is human capital. That is non-negotiable. But the infrastructure conversation is a lot more tricky. And the reason it's a lot more tricky is because it's sort of a chicken and a egg situation. You need funds, and that's why when Mr. Emeka said globalization is ended, that's why I had a bigger issue with it. The reason is because to start to develop regional value chains and to start to develop regional hubs and even national hubs, you need resources. So for instance, you're going to develop all of a sudden a full-time, let me think of it, cotton plant system, or even automobiles, whatever it is you want, you need serious investment, not just in infrastructure, which the government needs to provide, but also in that particular industry. And then, the truth is that your private sector also needs to be able to attract investment in that sector. The issue is that if the world is in a tight crunch, the tendency that you would get the funding you need to be able to start that process is a lot tighter. And that's why I said it's a chicken and egg situation where you need funds to be able to start the process of development, but because of your current situation, you're not particularly attractive to get funds. And I'll use an example, a very popular example, even with our most successful industry. In Nigeria's modern history, and I say modern history using 1999 as a peg, our most successful industry is, depending on how you want to argue, is that telecoms or banking? It's one of the two, whichever way you want to argue it. Tech is still a conversation, but tech is still a lot more recent. But one of the two best conversation points is that telecoms or banking. Now, telecoms, for instance, is still very nascent in Nigeria, even given its state of development. Some of our biggest progress, and that's why I'm particularly excited about what most of the governors are beginning to do now, where they're going to have conversations about crashing right of way cost between, and because the reason is because if you're a private sector investor and you need to invest in lines for broadband and for wireless access, the issue is you're going to ask yourself questions. If I invest $1 billion in this line, can I make $1 billion from the people that live in that line? If it's a village and I can't make money off them, let's say the entire GDP of the village is 200,000, it does not make economic sense to start investing broadline. And so the truth is, so it's that chicken and egg situation of saying, and I'm using our most successful industry where we have a track record of getting good returns over the last few years. So the question is a question of saying, yes, we need to start that process, but the truth is you need to also have the conversation about infrastructure and infrastructure funding. The last thing is the part of trade. Now, I skipped human capital because I want to come back to it when I'm tying everything up. The third part is the part of negotiating trade and investment regimes. Now, when I say this, what we mean more generally is simple, and that's a bulk of what I do on my 9 to 5, right? Which is basically an issue of looking at what the global trade looks like, looking at where your partnerships need to exist. So basically the question is, where in the world do I need to have strategic relationships? Where in the world do I need to have strategic interactions? And how do I negotiate terms that works for my citizens? So basically, as a country, and in international law, we call it diplomatic immunity to some extent. Basically, can I as a country go and negotiate preferential terms that works for my citizens? And I'll give an example. An example is, for instance, the Netherlands BIT. You'll find out that a big number of the investments that used to come into Nigeria over a period of time, and it used to come from Europe particularly, it used to come from either the Netherlands or the UK. You can argue why. Some can argue that Netherlands because of the tax issues, but that's not the purview of this conversation. The point is, it then made sense for a conversation to start to happen between Nigeria and Netherlands on an investment treaty that works between them, because that ensures that more Dutch investors are a lot more interested in investing in Nigeria, right? And those are the kind of things you want to do. Now, in the purview of all that, I'll talk about something that I worked on, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And where does this all tie up together? Now, by the way, note I've skipped human capital for now. Why does this matter? Now, the truth is simple. Remember what I said about how Africa is doing all this fantastic production, but it's very, very single commodity and very basic. So what the AFCFTA is saying is simple. The AFCFTA is saying, listen, when you look and you try to trace most African countries' trade lines, you find out that a lot of them do not trade a lot of things that can be traded, not because, and let me get more interesting to you. The way, when you look at the HS code, what happens is that there is the most basic, so let's say cocoa, right? But when you start to get more complicated on the HS code, there's a lot more lines you can trade in. So you can trade in coffee powder, you can trade in diagonal coffee, and you can, on just coffee beans alone, you can go to almost as much as maybe 100 different components. What you find out is that African countries generally trade on the most basic, which is coffee beans, because what happens is that we take this coffee beans and we just send it to what? Switzerland, we send it to Netherlands, and they refine it, and then we buy it back. Same with oil, we ship crude oil down. So what the FCFTA is saying is, listen, the second thing the FCFTA notices is also that, listen, you find out that a lot more African countries actually have stronger trade relations with foreign governments than they have with African countries. So one of the records shows that it's actually a lot more, it's actually cheaper to get things from the United Kingdom to Nigeria, or even Netherlands to Nigeria, than to get things from probably Benin Republic or Chad. In fact, to fly to London takes me 6 hours. To fly to Chad, I had to go to 3 countries. And to fly to Niger, I need to go to 3 countries. And so those are the kind of things you're looking at. So basically, the FCFTA says, listen, can we create a preferential regime within Africa where all the African countries can then prioritize trading between themselves and then start to create what we call regional value chains? So basically, can we come to a system where instead of a Cote d'Ivoire, which is probably the world's biggest supplier of cocoa beans, instead of them sending raw cocoa beans to Switzerland, can they send it to Nigeria, which has some manufacturing capacity, and Nigeria can then refine that and ship it together? Can we do more trading amongst, for instance, one of the biggest car hubs in the world is South Africa? Can we buy more of our cars from South Africa? Can South Africa buy more of the component parts from their cars? So the glasses, the spark plugs. And the trading is that, can we create a system where African countries are not competing with themselves for the same market slice, but are actually creating markets together? So basically, an example would be, and the reason that's important is that it then makes a bigger sense to have infrastructure investment. Because if I'm a foreign investor and I look and I see there is a potential pie of 3 trillion USD, that's the GDP of that is projected, and you've got these 3 trillion people, right? The question becomes that it makes more sense to spend my time investing in this size of people than to actually when they're in piecemeal. So if I'm looking at a country of just 150 million people, it looks fine. But then when you tell me on the other hand that there's this 3 trillion people, it makes more sense for me to focus on that than to focus on just one. And that's the idea. The idea is that, can we make one single market? So when Nigeria talks about Nigeria is the leading supplier of say Pampers, or I don't know, of shirts, materials of a certain type, can we say we got that for a size of 3 million? Because then there are bigger slides on the table than when you're just controlling one country's, and that's basically the idea of the AFCFTA. Now, how does this all tie up together? One of the important things for African countries is an investment, a careful intentional investment in human capital development. What that means to great extent is things like education, skills. You need to have honest conversations about whether the system we have put in place where a university education is the primary way to get into the social mobility system works any further or not. And the reason is because, and there's a popular Netherlands, and you can do the research on this. There's a popular Netherlands, and Netherlands is actually, Netherlands and Switzerland as two of the countries that have a very tested vocational scheme system, where basically they're saying, listen, why don't I require that everybody should get a university degree? Can we create vocational skills? So with vocational skills, people can start their lives in Switzerland and actually grow through the economic ladder, the social mobility ladder. So that's an important question. Can we, and then when you go into more formal education, can we make quality investments? And that quality investment involves, can we carefully tie up private sector, the academia, civil society, and government in a line that works together for education? So what's happened now is that government subsidizes education, and then they go out, and that's the end of the chain. Can we create a system where there is a link between private sector's needs? So for instance, can we spend more investment in ensuring that the things that private sector cares about is what universities are spending more resources on? Can we create a system where we have more fellowships and more funding for research in important parts in academia where private sector wants to make an investment? And those are the kind of linkages you're thinking of. So the question is, human capital needs to be the first thing. The truth is, you can build all the roads and the bridges and the factories you want. If human capital does not work, there are no people. And that's another important question. When we say Nigeria has a size of 200 million people, it's a great narrative to put. But two questions you want to ask yourself also at the same time is, one, that 200 million people, what's their economic capital like? So what is their earning potential? How much can they earn? Two is that what's their skill set level? And those are important questions, because when you start to say you want to compete with a country like China or Korea or whatever it is, the question is, can I set up a car plant today and you will get me 200,000 people that can run a car plant in the technical components of it? That's an important question. Can I, if you say you want to set up a garment factory today, and those are kind of things we're talking about, questions of when you start to then have investment, when you talk about impact investment, can we have investment that is tied to actual vocational and impact resource mobilization? So basically cases where you're coming in to invest, you're at the same time training on people in the country to actually try to pick up these skills. Because the truth of the matter is that in every economy, there is an upscaling of skills. So basically people start at the most basic level and they start to upscale over time. And the reason is that today, people, even with the most basic skills in China, have become a lot more expensive because the economy has become a lot more sophisticated. And so what you need is to be able to do that same upskilling, because people should be able to start their lives regardless of whether they went to university or not, regardless of whether or not they are antsy or they are nerdy, whatever, or they are intellectuals. They should be able to start their lives and actually have a track record towards social mobility. And not even talking about how that resolves a lot of social tension. It's just the only way to go, because what happens is that you then have a lot more people earning, which means more people that the government can tax, which means more industries that can grow, which means more people that can serve for industrialization purposes, which means a bigger incentive for industries that want to invest in industrialization processes, which means a bigger size of people that can spend for consuming power, which means a bigger case you can make for a continent that then can come together for regional value chains, which also means in the long term that an investor sees a bigger slice that makes more sense. He sees people that he can invest in as talent. He sees distribution because now people can invest more in logistics. He sees manufacturing because there are people who can take up the work of manufacturing. He sees consumers because there are people who can consume. And then he sees people who can put pressure in the places that matter for you to be able to talk of things like export. The truth is, people talk a lot of time about how Africa has a big market for itself. But the truth is, if we're being honest, at the initial stages for the probably next 10, 20 years of industrialization, what would matter is actually exports. And that's another reason why the EFCFTA matters, because it crashes the regime within Africa and allows Africa export as a whole. So for instance, what's going to start happening is that Africa as itself will be able to say, within the African continent, we don't have tariffs amongst ourselves. So I can spend, and I'll give you an example using cars. Right? Because I think it's good to give real pictorial examples. Cars. Now, we can talk all we want about how we want Nigeria to start having a car manufacturing plant and it's a pride of the nation, but it's a waste of time. And I'll tell you why it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time because you want to ask yourself a fundamental question. What is the buying power for a Nigerian for a car? And I'll give context. the car automobile chain has broken down quite a bit, such that today in the world, Toyota, for instance, has different plants all over the world, and each of those plants competes for which of them will be the ones to manufacture a certain particular brand. So when Toyota Corolla 2021 comes out, all the Toyota brands, well, they do it years in advance. So let's say 2025, all the Toyota brands globally will compete for which of them will be the ones to take up that manufacturing capacity, that manufacturing piece. And generally what happens is that you only pick up probably one corporate brand, maybe just Toyota Corolla 2025. Someone else will get Toyota Camry. And then what happens is that you all produce what you're most efficient at and you import to yourself so that everybody has the same stock. So someone produces RAV4, someone produces Corolla, someone produces Camry, someone produces Forerunner, whatever it is, and then you all import across board. You export what you produce, you import from the rest, and so that you have a mix. Now, what that means is this. It means that for any plant in the world, Toyota, whatever it is, to be able to successfully run, it needs to be able to sell 100,000 units of a car, of a brand, of a particular brand of a car in a year. So I'm not saying 100,000 Toyota cars. No, I'm saying 100,000 Toyota Camrys in 1 year. Now, the question you ask yourself is, how many cars were sold in Nigeria in the last year? And brand new cars, by the way, were sold in Nigeria last year. How many brand new cars were sold in Nigeria in the last 2 years? How many brand new cars were sold in the last 3 years? Let's compound it a bit more and get a lot more interesting. What is the value of those cars? The average buying power for a Nigerian, and the cheapest car in the world today, I think, is about $10,000. That's about using Nigeria's current exchange rate today is about 4.5 million. How much does a Nigerian actually spend on a brand new car? On the first car, on the cars that they use? The average spending power of the Nigerian is actually between 1.5 to 2.5 million. So it tells you already that there's a market deficit. So it means if you want to have a car in manufacturing, a car industry that can take off, you need to then talk about car financing. And then for car financing to work, it means you need to get a data set. So you need to create a data management system. Now, but fantastic. But what if instead of doing all that more complication, we do it in a simpler way? South Africa already has a sophisticated car manufacturing industry. Nigeria, on the other hand, has a very sophisticated components industry. The biggest tire market in the whole of West Africa, and I think even in Africa, is the Badagry tire market. We do fantastic glasses already in Ibadan and different places. We do spark plugs, we do batteries, we do tires, we do quite a range of things. So the question is this: what if, as part of the EFCA, which means we're not paying tariff across ourselves, Nigeria strikes a deal with South Africa that means South Africa, for all your cars, you can bring them into Nigeria tariff-free, at zero tariff. However, on the condition that all the cars that you manufacture in South Africa, the spark plugs, the tires, the glasses, the batteries, whatever it is exclusively sourced from Nigeria. What that means is simple. It means if normally South Africa would have charged $25,000 for a car, because it's coming to your Nigeria duty-free, it's going to be cheaper, one. But two is that it also means that you create an industry for Nigeria at a bigger size. So now I'm only selling to second-hand users. Now all of a sudden I'm selling to the original equipment manufacturers themselves. That is, and then because you're selling that, you can scale up your capacity over time and start to even export outside of Nigeria those spark plugs, those tires, and those kind of things. Let's get it more complicated. What it also means is that suddenly cars from South Africa coming at lower duty for you. It makes more sense for auto manufacturers to make a deal, because auto financiers are ready to finance new cars, not used cars. To get it more interesting, what it also means is that
I'm just prompting you with. Okay.
Yeah. My point is just to show you how, in the end, what you need is a lot more the use of trade, the use of human capital, and the use of a very intelligent use of infrastructure financing to get the continent to work. All right, guys, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Wow. You really broke it down, and for whomever who's into trade facilitation, I'm sure you've learned a few things today. The human capital, intertwining everything together, bringing the whole picture together, that's really relevant. Thank you so much, Mr. Adetola Onayemi. And once again, he is the head trade remedies and assistant chief negotiator at the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations. So yes, he's speaking out of his own expertise, but very well done. Thank you, sir. Please, everyone, if you can do a virtual thank you, well done, clap, that would be great. Thank you so much. I'd like to call upon the next speaker, Mr. Ibrahim Abdullahi. He's a special advisor to the Nasarawa State Governor on economy. And he will be speaking about policy approach by subnational governments. Sorry, if I can hear an echo, so please, if you're not speaking, please mute. Okay, thank you. So yes, Ibrahim Abdullahi, he's going to speak about the policy approach by subnational governments in alleviating the impact of the pandemic on investors and creating more opportunities for investment. He'll be our last speaker, but just to prompt you, please 15 to 20 minutes, and then afterwards we'll just have a quick Q&A session. So for everyone online, thank you for bearing with us and being with us. The journey and of course the conversations have been so insightful, and I'm pretty certain that you're gaining a lot of knowledge. I'd like to call upon Ibrahim Abdullahi. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Winifred, and the whole team for inviting me to share some thoughts this afternoon. It's also very interesting to my good friend Tola take us on a journey on regional trade and the need for integration and leveraging our human capital in the African region. I work in a state government that is a subnational. So I'll be sharing my perspective as a government official participating in a subnational governance. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit the whole world very hard. It beats all our economic and financial assumptions, and Nigeria is no exception. And also small states like our state, Nasarawa, also got a big hit of the pandemic. So, you know, there is no, I mean, we cannot overemphasize the impact that this has had on the global economy, which, you know, in turn also has impacted on our own local economies. This then makes a case, makes more important than ever before the need to enable business environments across Nigeria. So as a state government, Nasarawa State developed the Nasarawa COVID-19 economic response. And the aim of that response was for us as a government to respond to the impact of the pandemic. We developed this economic response looking at about 7 key interventions. The first of these interventions is a budget review and reprioritization of our expenditure. By simple economics, the fact that the COVID-19 has affected oil, has impacted on oil production, and by extension has impacted on the revenues of Nigeria from oil production, meant that states like Nasarawa will have much less from the federation account, and which then means that we're not able to adequately finance our 2020 budget based on the assumptions for which our budget was passed. So this situation called for a review of our budget and also to reprioritize our expenditure. For instance, we had a 60% cut on recurrent expenditure, right? As a government, we needed to make that sacrifice to allow for a much more important, much more pressing expenditure to be carried out with the little resources that we are now going to have. The second point of our intervention is commercialization of redundant assets. It was an opportunity for us to look back and see the assets of government that are not being utilized or that are being underutilized. So we have done a comprehensive review of a number of these assets, and all of them are now up for commercialization. We're at different stages of negotiations with interested investors from the private sector to take up these assets. We also set up a COVID-19 rapid response fund, which is being led by a high-powered state task force led by His Excellency, our Deputy Governor. Another very important intervention that is ongoing in Nasarawa is turbocharging MSMEs in the state. At the heart of the economy of our state is the need for MSMEs to function and survive in this in the period of this pandemic. So we have looked at various federal government interventions for MSMEs, and we've begun to engage MSMEs in our state to help with the view to help prepare them to take advantage of these opportunities and also create our own statewide interventions. And some of these interventions are in key sectors like in the agriculture. In collaboration with NERSA, we're putting together this initiative for our youth going into farming. The initial investment will be about 200 million naira to help small-scale farmers and make our young people very productive. We've also really supported a lot of SMEs to begin to build local capability in producing healthcare equipment, producing hand sanitizers, face masks and all, just to keep the economy of the state going. The other intervention that's ongoing in the state is reviewing our interface with and use of development partner support. We've realized that there's an opportunity in this period to leverage more on development partner funds so that we will have much more to spend on our development plans. We've also created tailored support for high impact industries. For instance, the highest IGR for us in Nasarawa State is the real estate and construction sector. So there is a concerted effort by government to make sure that we are putting together a Nasarawa housing program that just ensures that there is activity in that. We're also looking at mechanisms such as annuity PPP sukuk, looking at other ethical financing mechanisms, leveraging public-private partnerships. To do that also, our government is working on giving the enabling environment for PPPs to thrive in the state with the development of an executive bill, our investment and PPP bill, which has now gone to the State Assembly, just so that we have a legal framework for public-private partnerships in the states to also be able to stimulate more investment. We recognize that we are now competing with the rest of the world for investment inflow into our states. So it is our duty, it's our responsibility to make sure that we better the business environment in the states. When we do that, we know that businesses will find our state very attractive to come and incubate, grow, and scale up their businesses. I think that this is very important for both the federal government and also subnationals. Obviously, this pandemic has has shown how weak our systems are, and it gives us an opportunity to really collectively have a rethink on the way that we do things. And the first and most important thing for us as government is to make sure that we continue to create the enabling environment for businesses to thrive. It's very important. And all of these key interventions being carried out by the Nasarawa state government are all with the objective of making sure that our business environment is rid of unnecessary bureaucracy. Our business environment is rid of all the obstacles and barriers to doing business. Another important policy direction that a lot of states, including Nasarawa, are leaning towards is the need for regional integration. This has really opened our eyes to the magic that regional partnerships can make in trying to solve some basic development problems. For instance, the northern states as an economic bloc have come together to have a rethink on the economic development strategy of our region, because geographically we're all connected, and we think that there is an opportunity for us to build infrastructure together. We think that there is an opportunity to support different local economies, and also even develop infrastructure project pipeline together, because when we do it as an economic bloc, we make a more compelling case, we make a more economically viable case for all of our development plans. Yes, we are in the middle of a global public health crisis. Governments must, at all levels, step up to these occasions and really play a key role of an enabler. Government must be seen to play a critical hand-holding role to ensure that businesses don't die. Our collective responsibility, I think in 2020, is to ensure that businesses survive so that our people don't lose jobs. And in Nasarawa State, we're very, very committed to this objective, and that is why we've been working around the clock to implement these 7 key interventions that I've spoken about. I'll be happy to take more questions from the audience on to speak more on the different interventions we are implementing as a government.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abdullahi. That was very insightful as well, what Nasarawa State is doing in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, of course, we don't know the results, but hopefully the impact of the work you're doing is actually is very progressive and also growing the economy as well. Thank you so much. So we're going to open the floor for a Q&A session. So if you're online and you'd have a question, so yeah, just come online, come on board and ask your question. We'll have maybe 3 questions if possible. So who would like to go ahead first? You can unmute yourself and then ask your question. Are we shy? Anybody have a question? Okay, then. Okay, well, I've got a few questions for the panelists, and if you will indulge me. Maybe I'll start with Mr. Onayemi. So the African Trade Agreement has been postponed, actually. It was meant to start in July. It was meant to be implemented in July, but due to the pandemic, of course, it's now been postponed until further notice. But given your experience, what do you think Nigeria is truly ready to be able to start interstate, inter-country trade, given the porosity of our borders? I mean, these were issues that we were dealing with ahead of COVID-19. And so because the government was hoping to protect the domestic market, then the government had closed the borders. Have we dealt with those issues? And now compounding those issues with COVID-19, are we truly ready to start interstate, inter-country trade? Mr. Onayemi, are you online?
I'm on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So yes, thank you for your question. So first things first, the AFCFTA was not postponed. The implementation of trading in the AFCFTA was postponed. So basically what happened was that by July, countries were supposed to start trading within the AFCFTA. And that was postponed. And the reason was because there was so much uncertainty, it just did not make sense to start to trade within the AFCFTA yet. Now, let me flag quite a number of things. All the things that we say are the issues for the Nigeria, porosity of the borders, exists regardless of the AFCFTA. And I think that's what I want people to understand when we say those kind of things. So I'll give an example. Smuggling is still a big issue in Nigeria. It's a big problem. The government is working on it. There's a presidential action group working on it. There's the customs working on it. But this is a problem. Now, truth is, without the AFCFTA, people were smuggling. If you decide you don't want to participate in the AFCFTA and you don't want to trade with the AFCFTA, people will still smuggle. And truth is, what will not happen is that, don't forget, the rest of Africa is already signed on. So what's going to happen is that all the goods will land in Benin Republic. It's online. It will land in neighboring countries, and then they will smuggle it into Nigeria regardless. It doesn't change anything. So all you've done is basically not join the regime. When you join the AFCFTA, on the other hand, there is now a number of things. First is the incentive smuggle actually crashes. The reason is because now, if I bring my product from Benin Republic or Togo, wherever I bring my product from, I'm not paying tariffs anyway. So the point is, what's the incentives? And the truth is, what's going to happen is that products are going to get what we call certificates of origin. So I would guess it's going to origin that tells you where the product is going to end up. So, and there's already an arrangement that is going to be designed for how countries will share the revenue based on where the product ended. So it actually makes more sense part of the AFCFTA, because what's going to happen is now is, based on certificates of origin, I would get my due regardless of where the goods came in from within Africa, as long as it ended up in my market. Do you get my point? So the truth is, so the AFCFTA actually creates a better regulatory mechanism for that porosity of your border than being outside of the AFCFTA. It just makes more sense. Because the truth is, whether you sign the AFCFTA, smuggling was going to happen because you hadn't fixed that problem. It was still an existing problem. Beyond that, also, there's a responsibility for countries to actually share information, which you get within the AFCFTA. Outside the AFCFTA, you don't have that cooperation. You don't have that responsibility for them to share information with you on goods that comes to their border, which is one of the biggest issues we have now, which is an issue of, you say things like, oh, all the rice from Nigeria is coming from a particular country, but that country doesn't even eat that rice and doesn't manufacture the rice. Of course, it's being smuggled, but you don't have the data for it because they don't have an application to share with you. So that changes within the AFCFTA more generally. Now, with COVID-19, what happens is it even becomes more important, because the truth is now the entire world is trying to recover. The entire world is trying to recover quickly as possible. People are looking for more alternatives for factories. It makes more sense now than ever, because you can now start. So, and the reason is because even for an industry, and I'll use you an example, Winifred. If you were, the services you provide, for instance, let's say you do consulting services. If you could start with the whole African market guaranteed, there's an incentive for you to invest more in that than if it was just the Nigerian market or just Ekiti or just Nasarawa. And that's just the incentive. The idea is that you can experiment more with even growth and supply within the African continent, and then grow. So that whole idea of the regional value chains we're trying to grow, the easiest way to test it out, the easiest pilot scheme is within Africa, because you can then try it out within the African continent and then see how it scales. So truth is, if anything, COVID-19 actually creates a bigger urgency for us to actually prioritize CFT. Because the truth is, another thing you should also not forget is that suddenly you're going to fight for the same resources for the entire world. It's a more attractive deal sheet to tell someone invest in the whole of Africa than to tell them invest in my country. Oh, and by the way, my country, I'm just the smallest size. I mean, on the other hand, you can then say, and the truth is, 10% of 3 trillion is always going to be better than 10% of 200 million. So those are things you also want to look at. Beyond that also is the competitiveness, because what has happened, and I'll not sugarcoat it, you will lose some industries. But the truth is, what happened with the AFCFTA, the industries you then focus on, you'll be a big player in them. And it's like, what's happened to the European Union? Germany does not produce everything. Poland does not produce everything, but they produce. They are big players in it, and they can compete at the global biggest level. And that's what you want. You don't want a case where what we're doing now is we're trying to produce everything. Textile, Nigeria wants to do it. Rice manufacturing, Nigeria wants to do it. Wheat, we want to do it. Cars want to do it. No, you want to be able to, and AFCFTA allows you that, because what's going to happen is that you're going to start to focus on your strategic advantages, because you have got other African countries that can, and in economics, we call it the theory of the efficient producer. One of the problems with nationalism is that it actually encourages the theory of the inefficient producer, which is an idea where I am inefficient, but because my country protects me, I am competitive, right? But on the other hand, what the FCFT does is say, if we crash tariff on textile, for instance, in all of Africa, you would automatically know who is more competitive. Because if it's taking you $20 per roll in Nigeria, and it's taking them $10 per roll in South Africa, and $5 per roll in Kenya, everyone already knows who is competitive, because now you're not paying duties. You don't have duties to offset and change that dynamics. What can then happen is that Nigeria can now say, listen, maybe we don't want to focus on textile. Maybe what we want to focus is that we have the best designers. We have the Daily Bibas and all those fantastic designers that we have. Who else? Who do a lot of all this amazing work, and Tiffanyamba and the rest, and then focus on that skill set, which is more refined production. So what's going to happen is a case where Kenya probably produces the cotton, it's spun in South Africa into textile, and then he ends up in Nigeria as a finished clothes that Chimamanda is going to wear to a gala in the US. Fantastic value chain.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's interesting that you emphasize comparative advantage. I think that's essential. We definitely need to keep on hitting that nail. Comparative advantage, how can we promote that? And what is comparative advantage for Nigeria? Thank you very much. I would come back to you. There's a question by a participant who spoke about, you mentioned something about diversification, but let's go on to other speakers and then we'll come back to you. Thank you. Ms. Ojo, I would like to ask you about MSMEs and startups in Nigeria or in Africa. How do you think they can be more, innovative in seeking funding for their companies or their businesses? What's your advice to an MSME or startup in terms of financing their businesses moving forward? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the question. First, I think this is a very critical question for SMEs and MSMEs generally, but let me even focus on SMEs. If you talk to 10 SMEs, maybe 9.5 out of 10 will say their first problem is capital, like, finance and all of that. And while that is partially true, it's not usually the first problem for most SMEs. Or MSMEs. One of the things I've seen as a major problem for most MSMEs is first and foremost poor financial management skills. The source of funding for a business does not always have to first come from external capital. And ideally, it is after you have shown how much you can optimize your internal capital that you should go and raise external capital. So the first thing you see when you interact with a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises and some early stage companies as well, is that there's just poor financial management skills, in the business. And there's a wide range of reasons why MSMEs have this problem. One is that some of these founders lack the skills, and because we've now popularized, say, be an entrepreneur. That you're an entrepreneur does not mean you have all the skills it takes to succeed as an entrepreneur. So there are things you need to learn, maybe to upgrade yourself on as an entrepreneur. So that's first. And then the second thing will be where the entrepreneur even has the skill, maybe they have the skill, they understand how to optimize their internal cash flow. The second thing is that they don't have the discipline. You can have the skill to do something, you may not have the discipline. They are two different things, right? So that's where MSMEs must always start from. Globally, MSMEs' first point of looking for capital is not external capital, because of the kind of risk that many of them, kind of have. And when I say it's not external capital, I mean it's not from like traditional financial sources like banks, like or maybe PE investors and co. It's first and foremost your internal efficiency. And then once it's clear that you've kind of you understand like that internal financial management, then you can then position yourself for capital. Now let's now move to when you're now seeking for capital. The different, depending on the stage that you are as the SME, whether you're at early stage or you're just an SME, but you have been a business that's been existing for a while, right? After, you've kind of focused internally, the next thing is you look at your what we call family and friends. So if you're an entrepreneur that is just starting out, that's always the first place you should start from. Because again, you have to prove that you've used people's capital, you've been able to deploy effectively, because before an external person, an external institution will give you capital. Apart from family and friends is useful for when you, for instance, you don't have collateral. There are a lot of banks that do SME lending, for instance, in Nigeria, like Fidelity, for instance. But by the time you engage, you realize that there's a big cap on what you can get. And most of the funding that you might really require, if, for instance, you want to buy assets or you want to for capital expenditure, you will need to have collateral. They need to be collateralized. So that's one of the challenges they face. So which means you always have to start with family and friends, Now, if you don't have family and friends, then you kind of have to go think about, okay, these financial institutions, what can you get that is uncollateralized? But then you then need to go back and see how you can build your cash flow organically. Maybe you have to tweak your business model. Maybe you have to tweak your product, because if you don't have collateral, you can't get funding from a traditional bank, and you don't have family and friends, right? Which is usually where you should start from. Maybe you have to go and tweak your business model a little bit, or tweak your product a little bit, so that you can start. You can generate cash capital internally, because there's internal capital. It doesn't always have to come from external, like I said at the beginning. You can generate capital internally, and then you can grow organically. So after these two levels, then there's the people we call institutional investors, like VC, venture capital investors, and private equity investors. And they invest at different stages of businesses. VC is like early stage businesses that have very high growth potential. So that's why you've seen a lot of capital inflow into a lot of tech businesses in Nigeria and in Africa. And by the way, we dominate the tech landscape in terms of the attracting VC funding on the continent. But those kind of investors look for very high growth. So most times, to be very high growth, it has to be very scalable. To be very scalable, it has to have some kind of tech components, right? But then even then, it is not advisable if you're an African tech startup to fully rely only on VC funding. Yes, the capital was coming, before COVID-19. We don't know what the situation will look like now. It's going to slow down most likely. But then the thing with VC funding is that they can pull the plug at any time, because it is attached to how fast you go. And if you understand that in itself, the more you grow, the slower your potential to grow even faster, because there's a base effect as you go. So, and if it's tied to growth, at some point where you can't deliver those growth expectations anymore, they can pull funding. But the good thing is, if you have developed, again, my first point about your internal capital ability, efficient financial management, then that means you will have used their capital well, and then you can use your own internal capital to sustain yourself. And then at a much later stage, private equity investors, and banks are always there. The challenge with banks, a lot of times, has to be collateralized. The collateral is usually something difficult for a lot of people to get, and so it's better to kind of like explore these alternative forms of funding, for SMEs.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your insightful provision. Just to also add, I believe the government is giving away about 50 billion. So that's also a good thing. And they waived the guarantor requirement. So I suppose that because of COVID, there will possibly be other avenues to seek for funding for SMEs and entrepreneurs, and possibly also individuals. Once again, thank you, Ms. Ojo. All right, Mr. Offor, I have a question for you. Somebody has asked online. The question is, so when it comes to investment in new business development, for instance, in manufacturing of petroleum products or textiles, is there reliable access to data that can support private individuals in making business decisions? Is that a priority for the subnational and federal government? So in terms of data provision, what is available? How easily accessible is it? And yes, over to you.
I didn't actually get your question clearly.
Okay, I'll ask again. So when it comes to investment in new businesses, so business development, for instance, manufacturing of petroleum products or textiles, is data readily available? And how easily accessible is it? And is this something that the subnational or the federal government is prioritizing? So basically data management. How can we get data? And I mean, given the COVID pandemic, I suppose now the data would be even more evolved. And is the government being proactive in gathering data for businesses to be able to make proactive decisions?
Okay, thank you. Data has always been an issue. Access to data has always been an issue in sub-Saharan Africa and other developing economies. But for Nigeria, we have the NBS that helps us to collect. But we also in NIPC, we have a research division also that helps to make data available. Most of the time, you may have to rely on some other sources, but these data can be together. So if you go to our website in NIPC, we have two sets of documents or platform that one can access. One of them is the investment guide, Nigerian Investors Guide. The other one is the iGuide, which is an online platform that provides access to information doing business in Nigeria, costs and procedures, and so on and so forth. So that data will always be a challenge, but it's something that also the government is prioritizing, in the sense that access to information will help investors make better informed decisions. So if you need specific data, you can always get in touch with us, and then we'll see how we can get such data available. But the bulk of the data you will get will be seen on our website, where you can get granular details at the level of an investor. Whether the oil sector will also be prioritized, if I got that question right, the oil sector will always be important in Nigeria. If you realize that about 95% of the revenue that accrues to government comes from the oil sector, you understand that even though government is trying to prioritize, diversify, the oil sector will still be relevant. But more focus now is going to Nigerians invest in oil fields. Focus is also on gas, especially when it has to do with gas to power the economy. So those are the sectors that are also very important in the subsectors that are very important in the oil sector.
Okay, thank you very much. I would also just like to emphasize the NIPC online, I believe it's a newsletter that one can sign up for as well. It's very insightful and it provides a lot of information. So as Mr. Offor earlier mentioned, once you go on their website, you can actually type in your name and get signed up for the newsletter. And you get further information about the economy, what is happening in the investment sector in Nigeria and beyond. So thank you once again, sir. All right, Mr. Abdullahi, I'd like to ask about human capital development and technology. You mentioned that, of course, that the government of Nasarawa State is taking on various measures to alleviate the COVID-19 pandemic. Technology is very important right now, and we spoke about increasing bandwidth, reducing the price of the waiver, reducing the access to the bandwidth for infrastructure connection. But the people, in essence, how ready are they to innovate, to start to change, to assess technology? What provisions are you making for your people in terms of human capacity development? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I think this has presented us with an opportunity to redouble our efforts for training and capacity development of people, especially our teaming youths. At the start of the administration of Governor Abdullahi Sule, we technology innovation hubs. And these technology innovation hubs are supposed to be training grounds, some kind of sandbox framework for us to the kind of support, the mentorship, the facilities to be able to think through and innovate and create ideas. And then government is also watching to ensure that whatever innovation or ideas that come out of these hubs get some kind of funding support from government at the initial stage. We have an agency called the Relevance Technology Board in Nasarawa State. That board is being supported. They produce equipment for schools, and this current administration has also been working towards increasing funding and increasing the capacity of that relevant technology board. So in a sense, we are reprioritizing spendings to ensure that we equip our institutions to have more vocational training institutes in Nasarawa State, just to take advantage of this wave that's about to come. In terms of also the policy direction on that, we will soon make an announcement on a reduction on the right of way for telco infrastructure. So we believe that will bring in more investments in the sector for us. Invariably means more jobs for our people, and then also the appetite for capacity development in that area will be addressed.
Hello. Okay. Thank you very much as well. Thank you, Mr. Abdullahi. So yes, we've gone through quite some time together, and we have learned from each other. We have spoken about several issues.
Can I still answer the question or not on the diversification of the economy?
Just in a second, you will. Yeah. Okay, then. So just in terms of closing remarks, I would pose a statement that you made, and hopefully you can give a word of hope as well as just conclude on what you might have spoken about. What is your advice in terms of COVID-19, in terms of the economy of Nigeria, for 1 minute for each speaker in the order of which you spoke. So starting with Mr. Offor, you mentioned globalization is dead. Regional markets regional hubs should be invested in. Maybe you can say something about that and also do a closing remark as well. Over to you, sir. Hello? Mr. Offor, are you there?
Guess we might have lost him. You can move on to the next.
Okay. All right, Mr. Joe, you mentioned, right. Okay, stagflation. You mentioned stagflation and how difficult it will be, how difficult the circumstances of stagflation is, but what is your words of hope, advice, words of encouragement, closing remarks, basically, 1 minute. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I don't know, okay. Yes, so I was saying, yes, I mentioned stagflation and saying that that's when you have like high inflation and at the same time you have a recession, you know, to kind of make it difficult, right? But again, like the core of my presentation actually focused on how subnational governments should begin to think about which areas of opportunities are thrown open by this COVID-19 pandemic. That's the first thing. Because as it is with every crisis, there are opportunities. So never let a crisis go to waste. So the real question is that many of the problems we have in healthcare, in affordable homes, in broadband infrastructure, we have had them in education, we have had them before COVID-19. So the question is, now that there is global attention by a lot of development agencies and funding organizations on these issues because of how poor Africa has been, how can we quickly leverage the opportunity this time to figure out which areas, you know, which aspects of these sectors do we want to attract investment in, and what kind of investors we need to go look for, right? So I think that's my word of hope. There's opportunity in every crisis, opportunity to focus and create jobs from, you know, these sectors that now that there's a lot of focus and attention on them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Onayemi, please speak about the comment you made about the Nigeria being adequately diversified, and that isn't the issue actually, and possibly your closing remarks. 1 minute, please.
Why do I get to answer a question in 1 minute? I'm just teasing the way. I'll just flag a number of things. First is on the Nigerian economy, right? So the Nigerian economy is not entirely sophisticated, but it is very diversified. So the first thing to know is that the oil sector that we all shout about is actually less than 10% of our GDP. I think as our last check, it's about, I'm just trying to confirm. Yeah, it's about 9.2%, 9.5% of our entire GDP, the entire oil industry sector, which contributes almost 90% of our federal government revenue. So that means that the non-oil sector is about 90.5% of the Nigerian GDP. Now, of that 90.5% of the entire GDP that is from the non-oil sector, services alone contributes almost 55% of that. And when I say services, I'm talking of banking services, information technology, all those kinds. So I'll give you more breakdown. Industrial sector is about, ICT is actually the fastest growing interest, which shouldn't be surprising to anybody. So services is ICT, financial services, agriculture, mining and quarrying, construction, basically. So in more breakdown, agriculture contributes about 22% of our GDP. ICT contributes about, one second, I'm just trying to confirm that. So yeah, ICT contributes also about 18% of our GDP. Banking and services contributes about 18%. So the point is, the economy is diverse, right? it's three things. One is, and you have to understand, that doesn't mean it's as sophisticated as every country in the world. And in fact, it actually has some strides. For instance, I think Nigerian banking services, and Abdullahi and everyone on this call, if you've ever banked outside Nigeria, banking services and in Nigeria particularly are probably some of the most sophisticated in the entire world. When I tell my friends in the US that I send money and I get it in seconds, usually they send money abroad and get it in days after. They don't get it like in that same second. You know, and that's because of major investment. And that is the stereotype of what should happen in every sector. What happens in every sector is that it starts to grow first, like what's happening in ICT now. And over time, it starts to get more deeper, more sophisticated, and more complicated. So for instance, Nigeria's financial services right now is not doing a lot of work in derivatives. They're doing some of it, but they're not doing complicated work in derivatives, in hedging and all that. They're not. But as that sector gets more sophisticated, it will. Same with telecoms. Right now, thanks to right of way, I know Ekiti State drove a lot of that process. They're crashing because of right of way. As that goes on, it means broadband will get to more cities and it'll get deeper. You get more reliable broadband access and all that. So the truth is, diversification, we have it. The first issue is that you can get more sophisticated and more interesting, but of course, that's an issue of investment in infrastructure that's required. Two is that the human capital that you need to drive those sectors can get a lot more skilled. So you would not compare the customer service skill sets or even the standard of maybe someone in an agri sector in Nigeria with that in the US. The third thing is resource mobilization. So meaning how much of that revenue that sector generates does the government actually get a slice of in taxation? That's another, and that's actually where the biggest issues lie. So most of these industries are growing. For instance, as at in a day, and I do this because I advise a lot. I'm invested in a tech fund, and I advise a lot of tech startups in raising capital and all that. And so this in one day, in a single day, I know that 20 million came into Nigeria's tech industry in one single day. So a lot of money is coming into, and of course, this is not taxable money because this is just an investment. But the point is, that money will go on to produce more income, more value. So the question is, as that value is created, does the government get a slice of that action or not? You know, and that's the conversations you need to have. And I say this because a lot of times, and I'm going to wrap up now, a lot of times when governments think about these kind of issues, they think of it just as a regulatory monitor, you know, but that's not the real work. The real work is, how do I enable these sectors to grow and then access my slice of the value that they create? Not how do I micromanage them, not how do I use them for religious purposes, not how do I govern them, not how do I show them I'm stronger than them. No, really, how do I enable them to make more value and then I can tax them more? The last word I'll say is this. We've heard all kinds of things about Africa and Nigeria. We've heard Africa rising, we've heard Africa falling, we've heard it's a tight time, we've heard all kinds of things. The truth is this. History shows us that any continent can take responsibility for itself at any time and can start an upward track towards making real prosperity for its people, for its citizens, and for its companies. History shows us that. What that means is this, that as Africa, the biggest conversations we should be having is, one, how can we galvanize resources to ensure that our companies are our companies and can create real wealth for Africans? Two, how can we ensure that there is value, economic value in solving major African problems? Because that's the incentive for an entrepreneur to solve a problem, if there is. Three, how can we ensure that property rights are respected and preserved? So if I do an innovation, nobody else steals it and runs away with it. And lastly, how do we ensure that quality of life improves so that people can make meaningful contributions towards African life? That are the important conversations. And Africa can take responsibility for its own path of prosperity at any time that it chooses to. And I strongly believe in Africa. When I hear everyone talking here, from Total to make Emeka, Offor to Ibrahim, to yourself, Winifred, to those who put this event together, I strongly believe that Africa has a strong future, but we need to carefully align the resources that we have and chart a clear path towards prosperity. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's almost like a campaign, but of course, we need a clear direction. And of course, we need to be able to implement and use our resources as best as possible. Thank you for inciting the hope in us. Of course, I'm very certain there are mostly young people on the call. We can do it. We really can. All right, over to you, Mr. Abdullahi. You mentioned the regional blocks, subnational improvement of doing business in the subnational levels. What's your take on that? and what's your word, your closing remarks? If you can just highlight that and close as well, maybe words of hope as well. In 1 minute, thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been a very useful conversation. And I think that this dialogue should continue, should live, should not just end here. One, it is very clear that going forward, government should have no business in doing business. Our number one and most important role is to enable the business environment so that the economically active, the private sector can be able to drive the economies of our state and by extension, our national economy. It is also important for us to have this continuous and meaningful engagement with the organized private sector. Yes, when drawing up policies, we think as government, but it's very important for us to have that handshake, that synergy with the private sector. And also for the private sector to be very sincere, to also be very accommodating in the way that it engages the government, because if you look at their investments and development, you're developing your own space, your own country, so it's a win-win. So I urge that we do not continue to see the government as an enemy, but then as a key collaborator in ensuring that we salvage our economy. And so yes, COVID-19 has taught us the importance of collaborative efforts, and hence what I think that as governments we have an opportunity for regional integration. We've seen these examples in the past, and more of these examples. The resolve by northern states to begin to look at the development of the economy of the northern region together is very important, and I think that other regional blocks should begin to emerge.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our panelists that have spoken today. We learned about resource mobilization, focus, understanding where we are going, interstate, intercountry trade. We learned about regional blocks. We learned about the BIT with the NIPC, and SMEs, how we can also access funds, and how we can also, just the training, the very beginning, the very paramount issues, human capacity development. How is our people being prepared for the role of tomorrow? How are they being prepared to be those qualified individuals who can stand the test of time, who can be exported, who can use technology both home and abroad? So really, the plate is full, but then, as we mentioned, this dialogue is not just for today, it's for continuous, but of course, hopefully what we've learned today, we're able to share the knowledge, we're able to use and impact on our government, our policies, our legislature as well, and our businesses. I'd like to say thank you. I'm very excited for the opportunity, and I hope that I was able to perform my role well. I'd like to hand over the mic now to Mr. Toby. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Winifred. It's been a very enlightening session for everyone, as you mentioned. And on this note, I would like to invite one of our partners, Damilola Yakubu of Legal Box, to give the closing remarks on behalf of all of us.
Thank you, Toby, for the opportunity. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this call. When we envisioned to do this, we were hoping to have robust conversations about how Africa can chart its way forward to prosperity. We know that we're perhaps the last frontier when it comes to development, and there's a lot of potential that come out of the African continent. And we're not just thinking about it, not just from Africa alone, we're looking at the world generally and how we can restart the economy and restart our world as a whole after COVID-19. And we're hoping that this conversation, starting from this initial one, going forward, would provide insight and would help us understand the challenges ahead and how we can make our world better. I'd like to thank the panelists, Mr. Offor, Mr. Abdullahi, Mr. Onayemi, Ms. Ujo, and Ms. Odonye for joining us today and for giving us these conversations and teaching us and perhaps expounding our knowledge base and what we need to know. I'd also, on behalf of Tech Advisory, Ghana Legal Box, and the MBA Young Lawyers Forum, we're grateful to everyone who has joined this conversation, and we hope that you continue to join the series as we go ahead, to explore other topics that would help shape our continent as a whole. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure being with you this afternoon and for taking so much of your time. Thank you. See you at another time.
Thank you. Take care.